Go on, knowing everything gonna be all right. Say it again, say it again. I'm in good hands. I don't care what my financial or physical condition may be. How many of you believe some angels are watching over you? And keep on watching. Don't leave it now. Praise it. Thank you. As we close this, let me tell you again, going home. Wherever you are, put the lights up. Put the color around your shoulder. And go on to sleep. So in the morning, let me hear you say in the morning, yeah, in the morning, everything, gonna be all right. It's all right now. How many of you believe it's all right now? Well, tell somebody, say it's all right, 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 yeah, yeah. One more time, everybody.
Amen. Well, God bless you. On this Thursday, we're grateful for another moment with Pastor Brown. And I love that song by the late Reverend Dr. Clay Evans. That's one of my favorite songs. My home church, Great Mount Olive Baptist Church, was singing that song all the time during prayer call. I love All Night, All Day, because certainly God got angels watching over us. Amen. I want to look from where we preached last night in our revival. I want to go back there just again. Matthew chapter 14. Matthew chapter 14, looking at verses 14 through 21. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now, when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. And it's just so important. It's such a blessing that we have Jesus in our lives. Is there anybody that can just say, even, I know we're starting this, but just could say, I'm grateful that Jesus is in my life? Because think about this. Think about how many times you've been in trouble, but God has come through for you. Think about how many times you've been in a tough situation, a tough predicament, but the Lord has come to see about you. The Lord has gotten you through. And once again, like we talked about last night, aren't you glad that God doesn't throw you away? Aren't you glad that God doesn't just kick you to the curb, but God just says, okay, you're useless, or God just says you have to deal with this by yourself? God will not allow us to deal with some things just by ourselves, but the God that we serve is so good. God picks us up. God sees what we need. God sees what we're going through, and God will make a way for us. And that is something that we need to understand and realize on today, is that God will make a way for you. God is already making a way for you. God is already taking care of you. God is already opening doors for you. But one thing you have to do is bring him what you have. Whatever it is, listen, nothing you have should make you feel like it is small or insignificant. God always takes what we have, and when we are good stewards over what we have, God will take us further. God will take us higher, and God will bless us more, and God will bless us better, because we are giving to God what God has blessed us with. Listen, God has blessed you with a lot. God has blessed you with more than what you can even ask for. And aren't you glad that God is blessing you? Aren't you glad that God is taking care of you? Listen, sometimes we do get afraid of things. We do. Because sometimes we live in a world, we live in a society, we live in things that make us afraid. We live in a world that makes us think, if you don't have if you don't make a certain amount of money, if you don't have a certain class, if you don't have a certain car, then you're not significant, that you're insignificant. But that's false. That's not true, because God will bless you when you are doing what you're supposed to do with what God gives you. Listen, everybody may not be a millionaire. Everybody may not be a billionaire, but whatever you have, it's what God has blessed you with. But can you be satisfied and blessed with what you have? Because when you are blessed and satisfied with what you have, God will do so much with that. God will take care of you in so many ways that nobody can compare to that. But we have to allow ourselves to let God bless us, and we have to be satisfied with the blessing. Am I right? We got to be satisfied with what God is giving us. We have to be satisfied with what God is doing for us. Because, listen, when we look at this text, it seems like something small. It seems like something minute. It seems like something that's like, wait, 2 fish, 5 loaves. And Jesus says, give it to me. That right there is the miracle to me. Jesus says, give it to me. Now, of course, we see that the disciples said it was a desolate place. The disciples were ready to leave. The disciples were ready to go. But Jesus said, Jesus tests them and says, no, you got to feed them. Then they said, we have 2 fish, 5 loaves. Jesus says, bring them to me. Then Jesus lifts them up to heaven, thanks God, breaks them, and gives it to the crowd. And then the text says that the crowd was satisfied and that there were 5,000 fed, not including the women and children. Then they had 12 baskets full after feeding that many people. Now, we don't know how many people it was, but if Jesus can feed all of those with just that, look at what he can do and still have some left over. Look what he can do in your life. And that is something that we have to understand and be encouraged by. God will never leave you empty-handed. God will never leave you without something. God will never leave you by yourself. And God knows what you need. God knows what you're facing. God knows what you're dealing with. That's encouraging for me. God knows what I deal with. God knows what we all deal with. But we got to bring him our fish and bread. Are you going to bring God your fish and bread? Whatever you have, you need to bring God your fish and your bread. But when you bring God your fish and your bread, God will take it higher and do some things that nobody else can do. We're in Black History Month. It's a whole lot of people that had fish and bread, but the Lord took them higher. An African American created what we know as the Super Soaker, a water gun. Now, ever since the creation of the water gun, there have been water guns for days. There have been different concepts. There have been different things that have been created to have a different type of water gun. But an African American created one Super Soaker, took his fishes and loaves, created a Super Soaker, and then now look, you got water guns for days. Because when you give it to God, when you let the Lord have it, God will take you to heights that you never thought you could make. God will take you places that you never thought you could ascend to, but you got to give God what is his. Lord have mercy. Another African American working on a farm, created Hidden Valley Ranch dressing. I love Hidden Valley Ranch dressing. I think it's the best ranch dressing. And when I even discovered that it was created by an African American, I was like, what? But once again, fish and loaves. But look what fish and loaves will do. It'll make you have a national brand. Hidden Valley is a national brand ranch dressing. But when a person has fishes and loaves, but when they give it their all and when they put it in the master's hand, God will do something amazing. God will do something fantastic. God will do something marvelous. Do you want a miracle? You want to put that in the comments, say, I want a miracle. Is there anybody that say, I want a miracle? I want the Lord to bless me. I want the Lord to feed me. I want the Lord to make a miracle. I want the Lord to turn things around for me in my life and I desire that. I want that. Do you really want a miracle? Because if you want a miracle, you got to take some steps. You got to do some things. You can't just sit down, but you got to bring it to God. And that's a word for a whole lot of people. You cannot just get things just sitting down. You can't just get things just sitting down. If you want a miracle, there are times you got to work and you got to put in some effort, but you can't just sit down. That's a word for our youth. Those youth that play sports. You want playing time? You got to put in some work. Sometimes you need to stay after practice late. Sometimes you need to ask the coach some more questions. Sometimes you need to say, Coach, how can I improve? And sometimes you got to take it upon yourself. Sometimes you got to put the video game down and go out there and sweat and work. If you want playing time, if you want to get better, If you want your relationship to get better, you got to put in some work. If you want an effective relationship, you got to put in some work. You got to sometimes put your phones down, look at each other eye to eye, and have serious conversations, honest conversations, transparent conversations, and not just conversations that'll make you laugh. Sometimes you got to have conversations that are going to convict you and conversations that really are going to challenge you. But if you want it to work, you got to put in some work. But we can't desire miracles from God and we're not giving him all of us. We got to give God all of us, not little pieces of us, but you got to give God all of you. Don't just give God, don't just hold back from God, but give God all that God has given you. Give it back to him and thank God for what God has given you. Be satisfied with what God has given you, because God doesn't have to give any of us anything, but because he does, that ought to make us thankful, that ought to make us rejoice, that ought to make us happy, and that ought to make us shout. Boy, that's why I love having church. I love having church. I love having good church. I love to shout. I love to praise. I love to worship because I know how good God has been. That's why when we get in that sanctuary, when we get in that building, even before we ought to have a lot of praise. But when we get in that sanctuary, get in that building, as good as God has been to us, we ought to be praising nonstop because God has been that good. If you know God has been good to you, you ought to tell the Lord, thank you. You ought to thank God every day. You ought to thank God for your fish. Thank God for your bread. Thank God for your life. Thank God for what God has done for you. You got everything you need. Why do you have everything you need? Because God gave it to you. But before God gives you more, he wants to see what you do with what you got. So what you have, God is saying, I want to see what you're going to do with this. It doesn't mean God won't give you more, but we have to be good stewards over what God has already given us. Even as a church, we have to be good stewards over what the Lord has given us. And when we take care of what the Lord has already given us, then God will give us more. God will take us higher. God will elevate us, but we have to be good stewards over what the Lord has already given us and what the Lord has already done for us. So let us be good stewards. Let's give God all that we have. And when we do that, watch how God will take care of you. Lord have mercy. Watch how God will bless you. Watch how God will see you through. Watch how God will make miracles happen. Because I believe God will do great things. I know God will do great things. I have faith. I talk it and say, I believe that God will do great things. You got to believe in God. You got to have faith in God. And you got to say, I trust in God and I believe God to do. Is anybody say, I just know that bubbles me up. That ought to bubble you up and say, God, I believe that you're going to do it, but I'm going to give you all that I have. And I know that you're going to take care and take me higher. He'll do it. Yes, he will. Yes, he will. Yes, he will. You give it all to him and watch how God will do the rest. Yes, he will.